Hello there, and welcome back to the channel where we take a look at some of the more off-meta options and cards available to us. And today we are looking at Ray, who fittingly has the subtitle of Nobody. As I said when she was revealed, nobody would play as her. But I got a showcase, so therefore I am legally obligated to make a deck with her. So what is this overall trying to do? It is using the events to get us to the mid/late game where we are able to more effectively stabilize and switch to an attacking game to close it out. So let's get into it. What does Ray do as a leader? And we are going with a blue 4 space, the standard blue 4 space. What does she do? So when she's not deployed, you can exhaust her after you have played a non-unit force card this phase, and you can deal 1 damage to a unit. So it is yet another ping leader. It's not action efficient, unlike a lot of the other ping leaders, however. And non-unit force cards, well, I had a look. There are 2 force upgrades. One of them is in double blue, and the other is bolstered endurance. And there are technically other force upgrades, but they are pilots. Guess how many pilots there are? There is the green Luke Skywalker and the yellow Anakin. So, not in these colours. So, yeah, it is basically all events as it stands. And I am thinking when rotation hits, Rey will truly be unplayable because she will lose basically all of her good Force events. Anyway, she deploys on 7, so it's very late. She does have above rate stats probably for that point in the game as a 6/8, and when deployed you may discard your hand if you do draw 2 cards. So what this means is that we can be quite aggressive in how we are using our hand, because we know that by the time we get to our leader deploy we can draw another 2. It can be tricky to know what to do on her leader deploy, because if your hand isn't looking amazing but you can still use a lot of resources, so you've only got 2 cards in hand, but also if they're not what you need or what you're perhaps wanting to play at that point, do you then gamble and discard your hand to draw another 2? It can be tricky to know. The other thing to note with this is that if you actually have no cards in hand, perhaps you've already played your hand out that phase, then even if you've got no cards in hand, you can still discard it and draw 2. So that is probably where her highest potential lies, in that you just draw an extra 2 for free, kind of. But yeah, she is aggressively statted, which is good for that stage of the game because she doesn't have a whole lot else going on for her. But let's get into the deck proper. Actually, before I do that, what does her action really mean? It basically means all of the force events that we have are better than any other leader can make use of, if that makes sense. We get a bit more incidental value out of them. So onto our early game ground. The first 4, pretty much what you would expect. So Addy will get some incidental value whenever an opponent plays an event. Often you'll only get 1 ping because they'll power of the dark side her away, but you know, whatever. That's better than just losing a unit and no ping to their base. Night Sister Warrior. So the way that I play this deck is that often you will be playing 2 cards in a phase. So the Night Sister Warrior helps us to replenish our hand throughout the game, because we've got a lot of 1-cost events, so you'll be playing a unit and a 1-cost event. Secret Stage, pretty standard these days. Yaddle, just a very solid early game unit, even if you're not going with a 4 space, I would say, because of the Restore 1. Jedi in Hiding, so this combines nicely with Force Throw. I have had a few games where I've just annihilated their hand, and it's not even the game plan of this deck, but it's an option within there. It is hidden, so you're likely to be able to generate the force with this. And when defeated, you may use the force. If you do, each opponent discards a card from their hand. So extra value in Twin Suns. But yeah, obviously this guy, his force unit, he attacks in, generating force, and then he dies. You get them to discard a card from your hand. Their hand, I should say. Yoda, so similar to Night Sister Warrior, but with extra booty and Restore 2, you get to draw a card, which is very important in this deck. Chirrut, so a good bit of stalling action so we can get to our bigger bombs later on. As I'm sure you're aware, you can use the force to give the opponent -2 when they're attacking him, so he kind of becomes a 7 health or if he's got 2 damage on him, he's like a 5 health sentinel again. So yeah, he can be a very good staller. Often they will have to use an event or choose to use an event, which can be useful because it means they're not deploying another unit for us to deal with. Karrde Mundi, pretty standard these days as well, as a 4/4, and you gain 2 cards when you use the Force when you play him, so also quite important if we have been using a lot of events and units in the same phase. Onto our later game power on the ground. So the 6 slot is probably the hardest thing to figure out in this deck. Originally I had the Kylo Ren unit because it's a villainy, and then I could activate Anakin. The problem with Kylo Ren is that I would only use him as basically Force throw fodder, in which case you've got other things you can use anyway, and if you do deploy him as a unit, he is extremely aggressive, which is great, but he doesn't do anything when he's deployed, and that's a big issue with this deck. So I have gone for Mace Windu at the moment. There are some changes I would make because I think I come up with a better option afterwards. But what does he do? 6/6 on 6, so all the 6s. Overwhelm, incidental, but can be good. But when played, you may use the Force and deal 4 damage to a unit, so it can go across arenas, which makes him particularly potent. Onto the other Mace Windu. Now, I don't have any Luke, so Luke will never really appear in a deck unless I've borrowed them, and that's usually for a PQ. But I actually think this Mace Windu fits better than Luke would, which sounds mad, but the general theory is that we'll have done some pings around. There'll be damaged units on their side, potentially. So when he comes down on 7 and ambushes, he'll take something out, and then he'll be able to ready, and then they'll have the choice of what to do with him. The theory behind this as well is that on 7 resources, we can play Mace, have him readied up, hit into base, and then Ray deploys and hits in for another 6. So we've done 11 damage whilst doing a bit of stabilization, and potentially draw some cards as well. So that's where we can really look to get the game turning around in our favour. On to Chewbacca, who he never really sees any play, in my opinion. He might be in some Yoda red decks, perhaps. But what does he do? He can deploy as an 8 off the bat, and when played, you may defeat a unit with 5 or less remaining HP. I think the main reason this guy doesn't really see play is possibly because red-blue heroism hasn't necessarily been a thing. I can't think of too many archetypes that have really done that until now, because his smuggle is 9 cost and it's red hero, so different aspects. But yeah, he's a great one to, because again, there's probably going to be a damage unit because they might be attacking your units now to try and get you under control. He just comes down, takes something out, especially if they got a sentinel, something like that. And the fact that he has grit can be very potent as well. So I won a game in a particularly jammy way earlier this week where, can't remember the exact state, but I had the Chewie out, they had the Snoke leader out. I stalled a bit to see what they were going to do. They attacked base with Snoke. I think they might have deployed a Devastator as well, so I used Shatterpoint on the Devastator to get rid of that so that I wouldn't... Well, no, they still had lethal with Snoke for the next phase, but because Shatterpoint is a Force event, I was able to ping Chewie to give him an extra 1 power, which was exactly what I needed to then win the game with my next attack. So that can be good. I have also Force thrown myself to then grit Chewie up. So I've yeeted a Anakin Skywalker at Chewie so that he then has 10 power. That can also be an interesting use case for him. But yeah, he's actually pretty darn useful. And then 1 Crate Dragon. I don't actually own a Crate Dragon. This is still borrowed from the PQ. But I think a Crate Dragon fits quite well. You'll know what it does. It's just an excellent finisher, and it's also good Force throw fodder as well if you desperately need to get rid of something. This is a 51 card deck as well, and Crate Dragon is essentially the 51st card. On to space. We're extremely light in space, but we don't necessarily need it because of the good amount of events that we have to be able to interact across arenas. So, a red 5 The sole reason it's here is because we are pinging as we go quite regularly, so we're going to get some bonus value out of Red 5 by just sniping things from space. And then I've gone with one of Redemption, which is a fairly late addition to the deck, mainly because when I was playing the deck, I realised I am more often than not resourcing Chewbacca, so he's in the resource row, which means he is a 9 cost play. I don't have any 8 costs, which isn't always bad because you can play multiple cards, but to help bridge that gap, we can play the redemption between Mace and Chewie slash Crate Dragon, and depending on what you're playing against and what the state is, you will want to heal the full 8, and your opponent is in big trouble. Also, because I mean, if this thing attacks, it is hitting for 6, which is pretty tasty as well, and it's a Sentinel. Onto the wild card, so a card that I like to highlight in particular that doesn't see a whole lot of use, or in the context of a leader that we're talking about. Well, this leader doesn't see play regardless, but to be honest, this card doesn't see a whole lot of play anywhere. So it binds all things. Now, this wasn't actually in the version I used at my locals because I put in a bit of sneaky stuff in there to try and catch some people out, which never came off. But it binds all things. It's a 2-cost event. It is force, so we get a ping off it as well. Heal up to 3 damage from a unit. If you control a force unit, you may deal that much damage to another unit. So the primary use I've had for this in the past is running one of my 2/4s into a 3/5. They have 2 damage on theirs. I had 3 on mine. I then use It Binds All Things to heal mine up and kill theirs, their 3/5, and then I get a bonus ping as well if I want to use it. So it's quite a swingy and very situational, but the other utility this has, of course, is that it can go across arenas. Now, 3 damage kills a lot of space units, so that can be quite relevant. The other thing to do would be healing up Chirrut. So Chirrut doesn't take a whole lot of damage as it is, and then you can heal him up and damage them back. But yeah, it is a pretty useful event. The other somewhat niche use case it has because there's not a whole lot of decks that run Tarkin Town that aren't ping leaders already. You could heal a ping off, but they will usually just Tarkin Town you away anyway. And you're only going to heal one, so it's not massively valuable. But if they aren't a ping leader, then you might be able to keep something alive. I had a situation where they attacked my turn 1 with Secretive Sage. I used It Binds All Things to heal my Yaddle up and kill their Secretive Sage. And then they did something similar the next phase, and I had another one in hand, so did it all over again. So they weren't able to Tarkin Town until something like 5 or 6 resources, which was pretty valuable. Anyway, on to the rest of the events, and these are all far less situational, I would say, than It Binds All Things. And Force Throw, I'm not even going to talk about it. We all know what it does. 1 cost, amazing. And we get a bonus ping, so they might think they are safe and just completely forget that we can ping them afterwards to finish off whatever unit we've damaged. Mystic Reflection. So this is probably a sleeper card in the deck, I would say. It doesn't see a whole lot of use. It becomes particularly good with Rey because usually you'd only be able to kill something with 2 HP. Well, actually now we can kill something with 3. Of course, if it has a shield, then if they've got 3 HP, we're not going to be able to kill it still. But yeah, for 1 cost, it's very good and solid. If you control a force unit, that is. If you don't, then it's kind of useless. Sorcerer's Blast, so this is probably the best event that gets better with Rey. So 1 cost, use the Force. If you do, deal 3 damage to a unit. Well, with the Rey ping as well, oh god, I've said the word. It sounds very bad when you say that. When you use the ping, you deal 3 damage to a unit. Well, plus for 1, it's a 1 cost open fire over 2 actions, which is pretty good, I would say, in general. Now, you'll see we've got these 3 very useful cheap events, and this is what I'm talking about where we're often using 2 cards in hand in a phase, and that's where our hand can get quite depleted. Shatterpoint. This used to be a 3 of, but I've dropped it down to a 2 because of all the other ways we have of dealing with things. But If all of those things aren't quite going to cut it, then we can just use the force and kill any non-leader unit, as long as it's not like a Chewie or TIE Phantom, all that kind of stuff. And then the forces with me to give us a little bit of punch and to potentially protect one of our units. So perhaps Chirrut. The disadvantage of putting this on Chirrut, though, is that he becomes susceptible to Felv Dragon. But then it might take him out of range takedown. So you kind of, flip a coin, I guess. But it's also a force event, so whilst it's aggressive, we can ping something away as well, potentially. So there's no upgrades in the deck. That could be another option to look at in general, but the other options, and the two I probably want to focus on most, is Force Choke and Anakin. I think that Force Choke would probably replace It Binds All Things, and Anakin, I only have two of him. If I had three, he'd probably replace Mace Windu entirely for 6 cost, that is, because he does not have the requirement to use the Force. And Force Choke with Rey, it's a force event, we can get a ping as well. So we can actually do 6 damage to one target, or 5 plus 1, etc. The downside is that they do draw a card, but this will also have a niche use case scenario of if we've got Chewie deployed, we can force choke him to make him 9 power and we draw a card. So yeah, the aspect penalty will mean that it costs 4. However, because we've got so many force units, in reality it's going to cost 3 most of the time. So 3 costs to do 5 damage plus 1, I think is pretty good still. So, and then of course it would activate Anakin later on, and that would be a -3, -3. So potentially -6 to 1, or to 2 different targets at -3. So yeah, I think that would improve the deck overall. Red Squadrons give us some more card draw, probably a bit too much on that side. I'm not entirely sure. Itinerant Warrior, so this could be instead of Chirrut, because at least if they do have an event to get rid of Chirrut, with this instead, you are going to be able to get 3 heal from your base. And we do have some restore in the deck initially, but then it completely disappears until redemption, pretty much. So this could be a good filler gap for that. Pillage, if you want to go more all in on the discard shenanigans before we get to our deploy, because we've got Jedi and hiding and force throw. This could be a good option as well. Anakin I've already gone over. Kylo I've already mentioned. But as an example of how good of a damage pusher he can be, he hits for 8 himself. However, if you choose to put his on attack on someone else, so let's say our Rey leader, for example, then she will hit for 9 in that phase, and she's been permanently boosted to a 7/9. So that is the potential, but he doesn't do enough when he comes down. He just sits there, and then great, maybe I'll be able to attack with him next turn. Frankly, that isn't good enough in this game anymore, if it ever was. So yeah, that is the deck. It's by no means gonna. I highly doubt it's gonna win any tournaments. I think if you are looking for a competitive red-blue force hero deck, I was about to say Rey. Yoda is probably the way to go. I did give Yoda a go, but I'd much prefer Yoda with green, to be honest, which I think is fitting because he is green himself. But yeah, I think this leader is actually pretty decent. Not completely unplayable like I think most of us thought she would be. I still don't anticipate any of my locals are going to give her a go. But yeah, I think I do like the deck. I would say it can be feeling like you're flying on the seat of your pants at times, because if you're using a lot of cards and you've not got a whole lot of card draw, it's like, oh my god, am I going to get what I need next turn? Oh no, I haven't. An earlier version of this deck did have more events in it, but I found it was really rough. Sometimes you would just be drawing, especially in the late game, you're just getting all events. It's like, great. I mean, I've got so many cheap events and nothing to do with them. The other thing I would say about this deck is that you do need a good combination of your events and units. Otherwise, this isn't really going to do anything. It just doesn't really function. I guess the exception to that would be, of course, if you're playing against a control deck, then you do want more units than not. But yeah, you do need a good mix, and yeah, it's pretty decent. I say, I'm not gonna lie, it's not gonna go absolutely nuts, but it's a good solid off meta option. So yeah, take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.